There exists a region in the eastern United States that covers more than 200,000 square miles, larger than the entire state of California. Yet it contains no metropolis that ranks among the nation's biggest. Its mountains stretch in long chains for nearly 1,500 miles, their ridges shaping the landscape into valleys and hollows that have tested generations of settlers. Despite lying so close to major population centers like Washington, D.C. and Atlanta, this land has remained comparatively quiet, dotted with small towns rather than sprawling urban skylines. Even today, more than 25 million Americans live within its boundaries, but they are spread so thinly across the terrain that one could drive for hours and encounter little more than winding roads and forested hills. This vast and curiously underpopulated region is known as Appalachia. Yet this introduction only deepens the mystery. A land so vast, so rich in natural scenery, and positioned at the very heart of the United States, might be expected to thrive as a magnet for settlement, industry, and opportunity. Instead, the opposite has often been true. The question naturally arises, why have so few Americans chosen to build their lives in Appalachia? To answer this question, let's explore the next sections below. Geographic and physical barriers. One of the clearest and most durable explanations for why relatively few Americans live in Appalachia is simply the land itself. Appalachia is a very large, very broken landscape, and that physical reality has shaped everything that came after. The federal definition of the Appalachian region covers roughly 206,000 square miles across 423 counties in 13 states, a footprint that runs from southern New York down into northern Mississippi, immense in area but composed of 1,000 different ridges, plateaus, hollows, and river valleys, rather than broad, easily settled plains. The Appalachian Mountains are not a single high crest, so much as a long, folded system of ridgelines and narrow valleys that extend for well over 1,000 miles. That folded structure produces steep slopes, limited flat ground, and many places where the logical locations for roads or towns are simply absent or prohibitively small. Because of that topography, basic acts of modern infrastructure, laying out a grid of streets, building long, straight highways, extending water and sewer systems, or siting large industrial parks are far more expensive and technically challenging in Appalachia than they are across a river plain or coastal plain. The scale of the connectivity problem is visible in decades of federal effort to make the region less isolated. The Appalachian Development Highway System, authorized to spur economic access, was designed to add thousands of miles of corridors to connect otherwise secluded counties to national markets. Even so, the program has required unusually costly engineering and long time frames. And as of the most recent completion reports, some of the authorized miles remain among the most difficult to build because they traverse rugged terrain. Moreover, the region contains a substantial set of counties that are officially classified as rural or non-metropolitan. ARC identifies more than 100 such counties, and these rural counties tend to lag behind comparable rural areas elsewhere on indicators such as infrastructure, income, and access to services, precisely because their geography makes economies of scale and networked service provision harder. Geology also creates particular engineering and environmental constraints that further limit large-scale settlement. Much of Appalachia includes karst limestone country, areas with sinkholes, underground streams, and extensive cave systems where building large foundations, highways, or wastewater systems is technically complex and costly. Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, the world's longest mapped cave system, is a striking example of that karst terrain and of how spectacular landscapes can simultaneously be poor ground for dense urban settlement. What do you think, if not for these geographic barriers, would Appalachia have grown into one of America's most populated regions, or would other challenges still hold it back? Share your thoughts below. Historical and economic foundations. The economic history of Appalachia has been one of both resource abundance and persistent hardship, a paradox that helps explain why the region never developed dense population centers like other parts of the United States. From the 19th century onward, Appalachia was recognized for its rich deposits of coal, timber, and natural gas, resources that made it an important contributor to the nation's industrial growth. By the early 1900s, Coal from West Virginia and eastern Kentucky powered steel mills in Pittsburgh and fueled trains across the country, while vast forests in Tennessee and North Carolina were logged to supply lumber for the booming cities of the Midwest. Yet despite this immense contribution, the region itself remained underdeveloped and poor. Much of the wealth extracted from its land was controlled by outside corporations, leaving local communities with few long-term benefits and perpetuating a cycle of dependency. The dominance of absentee ownership played a decisive role in shaping Appalachia's trajectory. Companies based in northern cities purchased mineral rights and timber at low prices, then reaped the profits while reinvesting little in local infrastructure, schools, or health systems. As a result, towns built around coal mines or sawmills were often company towns, where housing, stores, and even wages were controlled by the employer. While these communities could provide jobs in times of high demand, they were also highly vulnerable to collapse when markets shifted. When coal production peaked during World War II, the population of mining counties surged, but as demand declined in the second half of the 20th century, thousands of families left in search of more stable opportunities elsewhere. This boom and bust cycle not only destabilized the economy, but also discouraged new industries from investing in what appeared to be an unreliable labor market. Agriculture offered little alternative foundation for growth. The mountainous terrain limited the amount of arable land, and farms were often small, fragmented, and less productive compared to the fertile plains of the Midwest. Census data from the early 1900s show that average farm sizes in central Appalachia were less than half those in Ohio or Indiana, while yields per acre lagged significantly. Therefore, farming rarely provided enough surplus to generate sustained prosperity, and many families were forced into subsistence agriculture, reinforcing the perception of Appalachia as an isolated, struggling region. Another key factor was the lack of economic diversification. While other regions transitioned from agriculture or resource extraction into manufacturing and later into services and technology, Appalachia remained heavily dependent on coal well into the late 20th century. Even today, counties in eastern Kentucky and West Virginia face unemployment rates nearly double the national average, reflecting how deeply the decline of coal has hollowed out local economies. Limited infrastructure and connectivity. Another persistent obstacle to population growth in Appalachia has been its limited infrastructure and the difficulty of connecting isolated communities to the broader national economy. The region's rugged terrain, marked by steep ridges, narrow valleys, and winding rivers, made the construction of roads and railways both expensive and technically challenging. Even today, the Appalachian Regional Commission notes that travel times between many towns remain far longer than in other parts of the country, despite decades of federal investment in highways. For much of its history, this isolation reinforced the perception of Appalachia as a remote and inaccessible place, discouraging both migration into the region and the establishment of large-scale industries that depend on efficient transportation. The limitations of infrastructure were evident as early as the 19th century. Unlike the Midwest, where flat terrain allowed for a rapid expansion of railroads that linked farming communities to urban markets, Appalachia's rail network developed more slowly and with a narrower focus. Rail lines were often built primarily to extract coal or timber, running from mines directly to industrial centers outside the region, rather than connecting Appalachian towns to each other. This meant that while resources could leave efficiently, the people of Appalachia remained relatively cut off, with few opportunities to benefit from broader economic integration. The federal government attempted to address these challenges during the War on Poverty in the 1960s, when President Lyndon B. Johnson created the ARC specifically to improve infrastructure and stimulate development in the region. One of its most ambitious projects was the Appalachian Development Highway System, a network of corridors designed to connect previously isolated areas to interstate highways. While the ADHS has made progress, reducing travel times and attracting some businesses to areas along its routes, many corridors remain incomplete more than 50 years later, and rural counties away from these highways continue to face long travel distances to major job markets. Infrastructure challenges extend beyond transportation. A 2020 Federal Communications Commission report found that nearly 80% of households in central Appalachian counties lacked access to high-speed broadband, compared to just 6% nationwide. This digital divide makes it difficult for residents to pursue remote work, online education, or telemedicine. services that are increasingly vital for retaining population in rural areas. Similarly, healthcare infrastructure has long lagged behind national standards. Many counties have only one hospital, and in the past 2 decades, dozens of rural hospitals in Kentucky, Tennessee, and West Virginia have closed due to financial strain, leaving residents with limited access to care. Social and cultural perceptions. Beyond geography and infrastructure, Appalachia has long carried a cultural image that has profoundly shaped how outsiders perceive the region and how residents themselves navigate opportunities. Since the early 20th century, national media and political discourse have often portrayed Appalachia as a backward, isolated, and impoverished place. Journalists covering the coalfields in the 1960s, during President Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty, frequently depicted residents as symbols of deprivation, barefoot children, dilapidated homes, and jobless miners. These portrayals created a stigma that discouraged both investment and migration into the region. Businesses often hesitated to expand operations in Appalachia, fearing that negative perceptions of the workforce would translate into low productivity or limited skills. In higher education, Appalachian students who migrated outward frequently encountered prejudice, facing assumptions that they were less capable because of their accent or background. A 2017 study by the ARC found that young people from Appalachia reported feelings of being looked down upon when they left for college or urban centers, an experience that discouraged many from returning after graduation. Thus, cultural perceptions did not just influence outsiders, they also shaped the choices of the region's own residents. Popular culture reinforced these dynamics. Hollywood depictions, from the Beverly Hillbillies to more recent films like Hillbilly Elegy, often leaned on caricatures of Appalachians as uneducated, violent, or trapped in cycles of poverty and addiction. Scholars such as Anthony Harkins argue that these narratives have served as a national othering, turning Appalachia into a foil against which mainstream American progress could be measured. At the same time, many Appalachian communities have cultivated strong cultural traditions, folk music, storytelling, craftsmanship, that outsiders often romanticize as authentic, but simultaneously regard as outdated. This paradox, where Appalachia is celebrated for its heritage, yet dismissed as economically stagnant, contributes to a broader hesitation to see the region as a place of opportunity. For potential migrants or investors, the narrative of decline can overshadow the reality of resilience and resourcefulness. These cultural perceptions also intersect with the opioid crisis, which has further shaped national attitudes toward Appalachia in recent decades. Media coverage has frequently described Central Appalachia as ground zero for opioid addiction, focusing heavily on rural counties in West Virginia and Kentucky. While substance abuse is indeed a major issue, the intensity of this coverage reinforces the image of Appalachia as uniquely troubled, even though many other regions across the U.S. face similar challenges. For many Americans, Appalachia is seen not as a place to build a life, but as a region to leave, or to study as an emblem of poverty. This cultural narrative, deeply embedded in the American imagination, helps explain why so few people choose to move into the region, despite its natural beauty and rich heritage. If you find these insights thought-provoking and want to explore more stories about how history, culture, and geography shape our world, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next deep dive. Economic transition and outmigration. Perhaps the last factor explaining why so few Americans live in Appalachia today is the region's long struggle to adapt after the decline of its once dominant industries. For over a century, coal mining stood at the heart of the Appalachian economy, employing hundreds of thousands of workers and shaping nearly every aspect of community life. In 1940, coal mines across Appalachia employed more than 400,000 people, and in West Virginia alone, coal accounted for over half of all employment in some counties. Yet by the early 2020s, automation, cheaper natural gas, environmental regulations, and declining demand for coal had shrunk this workforce to fewer than 40,000 across the entire region. The collapse of coal was not simply the disappearance of a single industry, it dismantled the economic backbone that had sustained towns for generations. Manufacturing, another important sector in parts of northern and southern Appalachia, followed a similar trajectory. In the late 20th century, textile and furniture factories in states like North Carolina and Tennessee relocated production overseas in search of cheaper labor, leaving behind shuttered plants and hollowed-out towns. According to the Appalachian Regional Commission, the region lost more than 580,000 manufacturing jobs between 2000 and 2015, a staggering figure for a region already struggling to diversify its economy. These closures compounded the losses from coal, creating overlapping waves of unemployment and population decline. The outmigration that followed was particularly pronounced among young adults. Census data show that between 2010 and 2020, more than half of central Appalachian counties experienced population decline, with many losing 10 to 20% of their residents in a single decade. The ARC's 2017 report noted that the share of residents aged 18 to 24 in Central Appalachia was among the lowest in the nation, a reflection of how few young people saw viable futures in their hometowns. Those who left often did so permanently, settling in metropolitan areas like Charlotte, Atlanta, or Columbus, where job opportunities were broader and wages higher. Outmigration created a self-reinforcing cycle. As population shrank, tax revenues declined, making it harder for local governments to maintain schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. Reduced services in turn discouraged families and businesses from staying or relocating to the region, accelerating further decline. Scholars have referred to this as a rural sinkhole effect, where the loss of population and investment deepens existing challenges and makes recovery more difficult. Meanwhile, the rise of new industries elsewhere in the U.S., from tech hubs in Silicon Valley and Austin to finance and healthcare centers in major cities, pulled even more talent away from Appalachia. The region's relative isolation and limited access to broadband further hindered participation in the digital economy. Although some local initiatives have sought to build tourism, outdoor recreation, and small-scale entrepreneurship, these sectors have yet to fully compensate for the loss of heavy industry. As of 2023, the median household income in Central Appalachia remained roughly 25% lower than the U.S. average, and poverty rates were nearly double the national figure. In short, Appalachia's sparse population is not the result of one single barrier, but the weight of many. Its rugged geography, weak infrastructure, limited services, economic decline, and waves of outmigration. Together, these forces shaped a region where growth never kept pace with the rest of the nation. Yet this is not a land forgotten. Those who remain carry forward traditions of resilience and pride, proving that Appalachia is more than its struggles. Appalachia may be quieter and less populated than other regions, but its endurance makes it no less significant in the American story.